everyone, and welcome on this beautifully sunny day to our panel discussion on SDR teams of the future. I'm Nicola, and some frequent headlines I've been seeing in my LinkedIn feed over the last few months have been outbound is dead, the SDR role is dead, and my favorite, outbound is dead and so are you if that's the only thing you do. Anyone else seen any of this? And you can see from the data why these are happening. So the effectiveness of SDR teams has plummeted, just 18% of pipeline now coming from those teams, whereas it was at 40% just 2 years ago. 73% of SDRs missed quota last year. Well, being a marketing leader and advisor, I wanted to get to the heart of this and find out what's really going on. And who better to discuss it with than 3 sales experts with over 40 years experience between them. So I'm looking forward to some future gazing and healthy debate here. Now we're going to discuss the topic for about 45 minutes and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So I'd love you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. Give me your quick summary of what you think is the future of SDR teams. And please do post questions as you go and we'll aim to answer them at the end. So over to our panelists. I would love each of you to do a quick intro before we get started. So David, tell us about you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Dave Wilkins, British guy living in the Netherlands now. Been in sales for 10 years. Started out as an SDR at Palo Alto Networks, graduated to lead global teams at Solis and running sales development in EMEA for Snowflake. And now I do a little bit of consultancy and also running a SDR leaders community in EMEA. Got about 1,300 members since we started on New Year's Eve.
Thank you. And Shabri?
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Shabri. I've been in the world of sales for about 15 years now. I started my career as an SDR. I then moved into SDR leadership at Finastra and I scaled the team there from 3 to 50, building both people and process. I then set up a B2B SaaS consulting and training business called SalesWorks, where we worked with over 150 teams in the SaaS space. And most commonly with SDR teams, actually. So I've seen a lot and I'm excited to share that. SalesWorks I exited 18 months ago and I can't promise that my very hot cockapoo Sasha next to me won't also have something to say over the next 45 minutes. So you might hear some friendly barking, but I'll try and keep that to a minimum.
Oh, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, particularly if there's a bit of debate going on. And great, because you've come from the trenches, you've been there, done it. And then what about you, Mark?
Hey, yeah, so I'm Mark. I've been in commercial teams for 17 years, my whole career, 15 of those leading teams. I've had a variety of experience across SDR teams, from helping set them up from scratch at a pre-revenue business, helping that grow to 5 million, to helping turn around a pre-existing SDR team of about 10 people. And getting them productive again in a later stage business, helping them double their revenue. I've also worked alongside them while leading marketing or head of growth at Eventbrite. So working in partnership with the SDR team to make sure they had strong pipeline. So I've kind of seen it from all these different angles. And I've now transitioned from being Chief Revenue Officer at high growth tech scale-ups to being a co-founder myself and the co-founder CEO of a business called RevDup.
So that's really interesting as well. We've got Shabri, who's come from the SDR background, and you've come actually from a marketing background. So we're going to have some good viewpoints here. And there's some great suggestions in the chat as well, which I might come back to later. Well, let's get started with question number 1. I'd love to kick off with hearing your thoughts on the frankly dreadful data about the value of SDR teams. Dave, when you hear this, what do you think?
Yeah, it's sad, but it's true. And I think it comes back down to how organizations are coaching and developing their leaders to pivot to the new trends that we're obviously going to talk about in a little bit, of how the SDR function is going to be. But then also SDR leaders unfortunately haven't been enabled in being able to articulate what they are, the good things that are happening with their teams to the exec level and to the C level. And I think that's the core part. Organizations, they don't care about meetings. They care about revenue, pipeline generated, revenue, and how much contribution of that is those bookings come from the SDR organization.
Right. So the SDRs and their leaders just aren't selling themselves well internally. Shabri, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think, like David said, companies don't care about the meetings, they care about the lagging indicators. And I think, when I look at SDR teams that I've worked with, I think if I had to boil it down to 3 reasons as to most commonly why SDR teams aren't performing. The first is I think companies are hindering their team with non-pipeline generating activities. So I think across sales right now, I think there's a really scary stat that I think reps are only spending 28% of their time on actual selling activities, which leads to the second point, which is complicated or lack of process. I've seen CRMs that are like a maze and they have 15 fields to fill in just to change a lead status. And then with that, thirdly, they are bogged down with activities that aren't linked to quota. So I think, SDR teams, I think it's imperative to have a mission statement for your team, one single mission statement, and define what that is. It might be this team is going to be a talent pool for the rest of the organization. It might be a set amount of pipeline generated across go-to-market. Whatever your mission is, I think there's a gap on how companies are aligning their team around that.
Right. So it's mission statement alignment, tying in with then how you actually share that with the rest of the business, and actually being able to focus on sales, because less than a third of your time selling, it's going to be hard to do your job. Mark, you've actually worked and turned around these SDR teams. Like, what's your view on this awful data?
Yeah, I think my view is that it's blown up quite publicly as a topic on LinkedIn and become very prominent in the last few months. But if you actually spoke to C-level leaders and sales leaders, maybe even up to 18 months ago, this was already a topic. They were already assessing and looking at whether SDR teams were effective and driving value in their organizations, and starting to look at how to reevaluate things. So it doesn't really surprise me that things have come to a head. I think it's been there under the surface for a while now. But I think it's a really amazing opportunity at the same time to reevaluate, what do we want an SDR team to do? Where do they sit? What is, to Shabri's point, what is their mission statement? And then I think the other key thing is that we've really got to put a buyer-centric lens on this and look at, well, why is the declining effectiveness in the SDR function? Well, one of the reasons is we're not adding any value to prospects, right? We're potentially just spamming them and going after this volume game to overcome the decreasing effects of reduced conversion rates, and that's just not the right way to go at all. So for me, it's a really exciting opportunity to take a step back, rethink what the SDR role really is, and how do we add value into the prospecting life cycle.
Right. So this is not just about the rebrand, it's also about the repositioning and how you can really add value. So are there actually still high performing SDR teams? And if so, what are they doing differently? Shabri, what have you seen here?
So I think there are definitely still high performing teams. I think right now everyone's got the goal of like, how do we do more with less? How do we make the most of what we're doing? And I think we're in this really interesting shift from 2021. We saw this growth at all costs. So teams had budget to get as many tools as they wanted. And actually, I think we were in a bit of a dangerous period. I think those tools weren't driving efficiency in a way that we hoped. I think they were creating quite a lot of noise. And so I think the high performing SDR teams are actually quite lean, and they're looking at like how are we now coping in this period of profitable, efficient growth, and how can we use AI to our benefit? I think AI is not going to replace the SDR role at all, but I think the high performing teams are looking about how AI can streamline that, and in ways such as supporting list building, content creation, and some of those things that are going to hopefully help that 28% of reps spending time selling go up and up and up, because we actually can use AI to our benefit, not to our detriment.
Right. So this is about doing more with less.
Yeah.
And, Dave, you're from Snowflake. I'm pretty sure there were some high performing SDR teams there. What's the sort of blueprint patterns you've seen that makes a team really deliver?
Yeah. So at Snowflake, Lars Nielsen and Travis Henry, our kind of leadership over in the States, they created a concept called account-based sales development, in where it's that real one team go-to-market where marketing, sales, SDRs, and revenue operations all work together to identify what are the top accounts we want to be going after, what are the marketing campaigns that we want to be driving within those top accounts, creating nurture, education, awareness campaigns within those accounts that SDRs can start to work on. On the other side, those same target accounts that are priority, our sales organization working with the SDR team to say, right, these are the specific messagings that we want to be going after and the reasons why within those accounts on more of an outbound motion to convert. And so you just have this whole holistic approach in terms of attacking those accounts. Now, with that, there's going to be a lot of AI that's going to come in to reduce a lot of the, as Shabri said, a lot of the noise that in terms of planning, prospecting, and that's going to make it a lot more efficient and leaner. But that's the best one I've seen in terms of building out a modern day sales development org.
Right. So there's a lot of alignment going on with that go-to-market team. And Mark, you've seen this from both sides, of course. Anything you want to add about these high-performing SDR teams?
Yeah, I think what's changing is they're being very mindful about where they play now. So high-performing SDR teams are less and less going after the long tail of a market where the unit economics simply don't stack up, and it's relatively easier to automate some of those areas. So I think long-term and currently successful SDR teams think very carefully about where they play. And then they also make sure that they're adding value that it's harder for something like AI to go and replicate. So they need to add value to their prospects, and they need to be much more creative in their approach. And I know leaders love a framework. So let me just briefly share a framework that I use when I'm sort of teaching SDR teams, and it's the 5 Ps. So the first P is prioritization. And as a general sweep, people are prioritizing higher value accounts versus lesser accounts. The second piece is personalization. Now that's been there for a long time, but they need to get way better at that level of personalization. The critical step that most SDR teams are less good at is actually the positioning. So why are we contacting you? What's the value? Making that connection between personalization and the reason for outreach. There's the fourth piece, which is persistence. That's never going to go away, and great SDR teams are dogged and they won't give up easily. And the fifth P is they're progressive, right? And this is a creative piece. They find different routes to market. They find different ways to educate the market and get in front of buyers. So great SDR teams follow those 5 Ps. It's just shifted in terms of the execution a little bit more recently.
So building on that, Mark, those 5 Ps, what is it that these high-performing sales teams aren't doing? You know, you touched on, are they actually going after the right audience? Not that long tail, but is there anything else that they should not be doing?
Yeah, I think the main thing, and I talked a bit about the turnaround of a team that I took over, and really what they were doing is they were acting as human robots, right? So they had their cadences or their sequences built out for them in their sales enablement tool. They didn't really have any say over what the messaging was or how to navigate around that. And they were just there to click a button, right? Move this from step to step. And there was no level of creativity or thought or agency in their role. And now we've found with AI, we can completely automate that type of sequence, right? So what good SDR teams are not doing is simply being human robots and running someone through a cadence step to step without any additional thought.
Right. So again, coming back to adding that value. Dave, what about you? What are they not doing?
What are high performing SDR teams not doing?
Yes. What are they avoiding doing? What they're not wasting their time on so they can do more actual brilliant selling?
Yeah, you have to be very targeted on the accounts that you're going after. You can't go and try and do a whole spray and pray approach, because marketing doesn't have the funds to market into hundreds of thousands of accounts. And also the big piece is around that target, not having your SDR organization go after, and this is what I've heard about, $30 to $70 MRR opportunities, and they're spending a $70,000 or $80,000 resources in SDR, generating those kind of small returns. It's madness. So please do not do that if any of you are doing that.
I'm sorry, I really didn't laugh. It just seemed mad, doesn't it? $30 MRR with an SDR, crikey. Shabri, anything you'd like to add on top of that great comment from Dave?
I'm not sure I can beat it, but I think the top performing SDRs aren't focusing on volume. So what I mean by that is moving away from this kind of, we need to be doing 50 calls a day, and focusing on these leading indicators, which I think are really important to have in place. I think it's the right leading indicators. It's not about volume anymore. It's not about spray and pray and doing 200 emails a day. So I think the top performing SDRs are making the most out of their accounts, allowing their team to penetrate accounts in the right way by sort of enabling multi-threading and by enabling sort of that more research-led approach. And like, I think that brings it back to the point I made about AI, which is AI is never going to be able to develop that human connection and build that credibility and build that trust with prospects. So we've got to allow our reps to do that. And I think, you know, that's where I'm seeing some of the top performing SDRs really, really stand out.
Yeah, and John made a great comment as well. He said, this is where AI can do the unsexy heavy lifting, leaving more time for humans to be human and actually add that value. So if we get the crystal ball out and we project just 12 months forward for the moment, what do you think the SDR team is going to look like in the spring of next year? Mark, what's your view here?
Yeah, so I think I love crystal ball gazing. Always makes you look silly when it fast forwards 12 months. But I think my prediction would be three key things. So the first is, I think SDRs will move from being these, you know, on the receiving end of pure just execution to actually being more like campaign coordinators. They'll have to be great technologists working across numerous tools to maximize their impact and efficiency. So it's almost going to be more akin to a growth marketing role than maybe what you'd see as a traditional SDR. Second piece would be, I would urge people that they don't get away from some of the fundamentals still of an SDR role where AI can't currently replicate or automate. So they still need to pick up the phone. And to a large extent, they still need to be great on things like LinkedIn and building a social brand and social presence that's quite authentic and unique to them. And then maybe a final thought would be they really need to shift this mindset to adding value to customers, right? They need to be educators. They need to be more consultative. They need to find a way to build relationships that just doesn't burn through leads at the kind of unsustainable volume we see most SDR teams doing at the moment.
Nice. So more like growth marketers, campaign coordinators, great technologists. You're still getting on the phone and really adding value and getting that personalization. Dave, what are your thoughts for 12 months' time?
Yeah, I think we're going to see smaller teams. That's going to be what's happened. But what we're seeing currently is, it's like with crypto a couple of years ago, NFTs, AI is now the big bubble, and there's going to be there are some very strong tech that's going to come out of that. And what will happen is there'll be a consolidation of tools, which will make the CFO and the people that hold budget say, yes, we need to buy this because this is actually going to reduce time wasted on prospecting and those kind of manual tasks. So what we'll see is smaller teams, but then that tech that's actually being used to reduce the amount of time doing those kind of unsexy tasks, and we'll actually see an increase again in productivity and outcomes. That's my crystal ball.
We're going to come up to that tech stack in a second as well, so we can dig in a bit further there. Shabri, Dave saying smaller teams, what's your thoughts?
I agree. I think teams are going to be leaner. I think part of that is because if you think back to a few years ago, there was some crazy AE to SDR mapping ratios I saw, like 1 SDR per AE, and I just don't think companies can support that anymore, not in a profitable way. So I think they're definitely going to be leaner. I think we're going to see SDRs be in the role for longer. And I think that's a good thing, by the way, because I don't think SDRs are ready to be promoted after 12 months. I think that's a good thing. But I think companies are going to need to be more creative with like career pathing and make reps feel like that they are growing after 12 months and 18 months and 24 months, even if they're not technically promoted to an AE role. But I think we also are going to see, it's interesting when Mark was saying we're going to see them being like more growth marketing. And I definitely think that is going to change the shape of the role. I think we might see them becoming more like mini consultants and more like analysts, and actually I think a bit more less kind of sales focused and more analyst led. And what I mean by that is like, how are they going to be trained on reading an annual report, as an example? And so I think we're just going to see them maybe become a bit more technical in that space. But that's my crystal ball predictions.
That's really interesting. So they're going to go more marketing way or more analyst way? Well, I think we're going to have to do this again in 12 months, Mark, and see where we get to and how well everyone did. Dave, you mentioned about the tech stack. So how do you think in this new world in 12 months' time, the tech stack would have changed? Because I see at the moment, there's just so much technology out there, and it feels like a lot of companies have got these bloated stacks and they're not even using half of them.
Yeah, and that's the big thing about this advent of AI technology is CFOs are saying, well, why do we need this? Because our utilization of our existing stack is non-existent. So if you look at organizations like Apollo, and what Gong are doing and what Clary are doing, is that they're becoming an aggregator of so many different parts of the sales journey. So Apollo, it's signal-based lead sourcing that you can then put into your sequences, that then the calls are being recorded, so then you can see how well the calls are performing. So then if you do get a meeting, you can actually put it straight into your CRM, and you can have the opportunities living within that stack. And I think that's where tech's going to go. It's going to be a lot of M&A that's going to happen over the next 6 to 12 months, where they'll just become this really powerful platform for organizations now.
Right, so more like a one size fits all than a better breed piece. So you're going to your Apollos and Gongs who are doing a lot of, they're bringing it all together.
Yeah, 100%.
Shabri, what's your view on this?
I agree with David. I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation through acquisition in the tech, in the rev tech space. I think things that were nice to have 4 years ago are now must-haves, and I think the examples that spring to mind are tools around intent data and also conversational intelligence. If I was given budget to buy one thing, for me, it would be conversational intelligence, just because I think you can move the needle with coaching so much, but also giving reps the opportunity to listen back to their calls. And then I think the way that we use tools that we've always historically relied on, like SalesLoft and Outreach, I think they're going to change, because I think when they were booming, it was based on the use case of personalization at scale, which I think is an oxymoron in my opinion, because I don't think you can personalize at scale. So I think some of those tools the way we use them will change, but I think that we'll see growth in things like intent data, because I think you've got to have those signals ahead of when a buyer reaches out to you, and I think tying those into your total addressable market, I think is going to be key.
Yeah, and David's just been showing that they've got 6sense, Cognism, Zoom Info, but that's really where their intent data is. And there's another 6sense, Apollo. Shabri, any favorite conversation intelligence tools?
I think Gong is probably the most commonly used out there, and I think it's great. I think they all do the same thing, so I think it's less about which tool is the sort of sexiest, but I think it's about how managers use those, but I probably have to say go on.
I think that's a really good point. You can spend your time switching between tools, but it's really about how well you're using them. Mark, any thoughts you want to add there? I'm just hearing from Simon, HubSpot is becoming the single platform and they will become the platform.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's definitely a trend towards consolidation likely to happen. Despite that, there's still a sort of myriad complexity of tools in the tech stack. And so the way we see it emerging is that there needs to be a new, what we're calling a content infrastructure that matches all of that complexity of input data points that an SDR would have to manage. And that's everything from your analyst reports through to intent signals, through to a new thought leadership white paper that's been published by your marketing team, through to updates in the CRM data, through to intelligence coming from your call intelligence, right? And that's just a small slither of all these different complexities that they've got to manage that then pushes through into the existing distribution stack. Now that might become more consolidated, but what we don't need in the go-to-market system is probably yet another tool or tab for an SDR to have to manage and have open. So our view of the future is that, you know, where RevDup is playing is the ability to build this content infrastructure that takes all the complexity of all the data sources that are thrown up in the tech stack, consolidate that, turn it into all the different educational value-adding content that's needed to land with prospects and build a relationship, and then push it into your existing tool stack. Whether that is or is not consolidated is sort of not the fight we're in. It probably will become more consolidated. But the other key thing is that making all of this coordinated is really, really hard. So we are obviously talking about SDRs today, but any business running an ABM campaign or mid-market campaigns have also got these touch points across newsletter nurture programs. They've got their PPC ads, they've got their digital ads, they've got social media profiles, they've got landing pages. There's all these other things that tend to get siloed off, and therefore your message gets confused in the market, and you have this really poor, inconsistent buyer journey. So one thing that we think will happen in the future is this ability to more consistently update all of those distribution channels in one go, so that it's much more consistent.
And so is this content infrastructure, is this a new category here, Mark? And this is actually kind of helping the coordination between the different teams?
Oh, there's a very binary viewpoint on category creation, but for simpler terms, yes, it's something that is not there at the moment, and we believe is sorely missing in terms of go-to-market stacks to bring order to the chaos and make it more manageable for people in those teams.
And this is a nice segue into my next question, which is about how sales leaders are going to adapt to managing these teams, because it's not just about them managing the new look SDR team, but it's also about how they work with the AE teams and also their peers as well in marketing and other areas and customer success. So when we look at this new SDR team, how does this change the management and also targets, compensation, any other areas?
Who's that going to?
It's going to you, Mark. We're continuing on.
I volunteered. So I mean, the trend that I'm seeing is that the targets and compensation for SDR teams is getting pushed further and further down the funnel. David called it out right at the start of the webinar. It's not about meetings, right? This is about tying SDRs to incremental revenue growth. So I think targets and comp structures will be ever more run by CFOs rather than CROs necessarily. And yeah, it's just going to be tied further down the funnel. And it's going to, I think one key thing is they're going to be judged not in their silo of are they doing a good job, but they're going to be judged relative to other routes to market. And if they can't prove they're incrementally better than, let's say, pure inbound marketing, or let's say, you know, having 360 AEs, then those teams are going to continue to shrink, right? So they're in a fairly brutal environment where they have to prove their incremental value.
Right. So proving their own worth. Shabri, do you think that's going to change how sales leaders actually hire in the SDR team?
100%. 100%. I think, you know, based on what Mark said, I think we're going to see them carry more responsibility. But I think some of the competencies that we have historically hired for are going to change. So when I was hired as an SDR, I went to an assessment day, and the tasks and activities that we were set were trying to ascertain, you know, who could shout the loudest, who was the most confident, who was the most vocal, who was the most outgoing. I don't think those things matter as much anymore. In fact, I don't think they do at all. I think it's about curiosity, being thoughtful, work ethic, you know, innate drive, all those sort of things. And so I think for sure it's going to change hiring, but I also think the people that we've got coming in now from education and entry level graduates, I think are significantly harder to manage and motivate than previous generations. They want different things and they expect different things. There's slightly less patience. And so I think you've got to kind of figure out how you're going to balance that patience with motivation and like keep them in their role for longer. And you know, to Mark's point, like get them engaged further down the sales cycle. So I think we're going to see that definitely evolve quite a lot for sure.
Interesting. So coming back to that, they're actually staying in this role longer, and how that changes who you hire and how much you invest in them. Dave, do you agree with that?
Yeah. Sorry, this isn't a good webinar where everybody's agreeing with one another. We should have had some like different views.
I had a big fight.
Yeah, I think leaders need to set the right expectations at the start in terms of employing talent, and there's a psychological contract that is signed during the interview stage. If a hiring manager says, "Oh yeah, people get hired to AEs very quickly," and they just leave it there, people think, "Oh, that means I'm going to get hired quickly, promoted quickly into an AE role or something else." Whereas now, it's going to be like 4 years plus where people will stay as an SDR, and it'll be in differing functions, differing levels. But what we're going to start to see is AEs moving back into the SDR function because they don't want that day-to-day stress of closing the number, but they still do enjoy sales and enjoy the lifestyle. Just not stressful.
That's really interesting. And actually, Dave, that's a great segue, which I'm going to keep you to answer the next one. Onto my next question, which was something I hadn't even thought about until we were discussing this topic last week. There's all this conversation about the SDR teams are dead, it's just going to be about AEs. But where do these AEs come from? Like, how do they actually get trained up? Where are the apprentices that know how to be an AE? There's a finite number out there. And if you've got no fresh blood coming in, we're going to run out. So what about this talent pipeline? How do we continue to build that?
Yeah, so if you've got if we're starting to see more experienced people moving into these SDR roles, there is still a place for entry-level talent, but it's going to be more of this kind of data quality control, growth hacking role, where again, if we're talking about unit economics, CFOs, are they going to want to put leads that cost $100 to generate in the hands of somebody that last week was still at school? And do we not want those people who have actually been in seat and maybe closed a similar six-figure deal in a similar account, actually as an SDR calling into that lead? So I think there's going to be this kind of data entry quality control role that will form as an entry-level role, and then that will progress into some of the pieces we've spoken about around signal-based selling and sales development, and then move into more of a traditional outbounding role post.
Right. So really, we are really talking about how this role might change. Mark, do you agree with this as well?
So I've got slightly, like, my take on this talent pipeline thing is that it's probably going to produce a really interesting result in a few years, which is we do start to run out of some of the obvious talent pipeline, because actually leaders aren't willing to invest in bringing that sort of graduate crop through. For them, it's not their problem, right? They need results now. and they're not actually willing to take 12, well, however long, 3 months to bring someone in, 3 months to get them ramped, then they have maybe 9 months of productivity and then they leave, right? Which is what a life cycle of an SDR often looks like at the moment. So I think more businesses are thinking cutthroat, and they're not thinking brilliant SDRs or our talent pipeline. They're thinking, I'm just going to hire a tenured AE that knows what they're doing. Now, of course, the long-term impact of that is you don't have as many new AEs coming through. And so if you're an AE right now and you can develop your own pipeline, I think you're going to be in a very good place in 2 or 3 years' time to command a prince's ransom, because there's going to be less of them that come through.
Right. So you're kind of agreeing and disagreeing with Dave, and they think it's the right thing to do, but you don't think that businesses are going to invest in that. They're being too short-sighted. They don't have their crystal ball out.
Yeah.
Shabby, where are you sitting on this?
Probably somewhere in the middle. I think, firstly, I think we need to be more open-minded, because I think for the last 10 years we've talked about SDRs going to AE roles, and that's the progression. And actually I've seen a lot of SDRs go into customer success, which, by the way, I think is a fantastic pathway, or account management. And I think some people are just naturally more suited to those. So I think we have got to be more open-minded in terms of like what that next role is. I worked with a company last year, and everyone that went from their SDR to AE role, I think it was 80% of them weren't hitting quota. And I think the reason is and this is kind of tying into what you said, Mark, the reason they weren't hitting quota was because they just got thrown in the deep end. It was like, okay, well, it's Q3 now, like off you go into your new AE role. And I don't think that's fair. That's not fair on prospects. That's not fair on the reps. That's not fair on the manager that's managing them. And so I think what companies could do is help that transition with enablement and with the right kind of tools and the right infrastructure. So buddying, all of that sort of stuff, and making sure that manager that they're going to be reporting to has actually got the time to coach them and isn't just used to managing and coaching a ton of experienced reps, because it is very, very different. So I think there's got that transition piece has got to be a lot slicker than it is. And I think if companies aren't able to invest in that transition, then don't promote your SDRs to AEs, because I don't think that's fair, and you're not setting the team up with the best chance of success.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think it's interesting what you said as well about they don't necessarily move to AEs, they can move to customer success. And I have definitely stolen SDRs to move into marketing as well, which has been hugely valuable and some of my best hires. We talked right at the beginning about internal branding and marketing. Mark, do you think we need to actually change how we talk about SDRs and how we market them as such?
Yeah, I mean, actually, Shabri nailed this earlier. Sorry to add to the agreement, violent agreement that's happening across the panel. But you mentioned the idea that they're just moving away from this volume game. So it's got to be value over volume, or quality over quantity, whichever way you want to talk about. We have to rebrand SDR teams. I think traditionally you think SDR, you think I'm going to process a ton of leads, and I'm going to stack them high and run through them as fast as we can. It's not going to happen going into the future. It's all about building strategic pipeline, and that takes creativity and less volume, more value.
Right, which comes back to what are the skills and the attributes that you're really hiring for. Dave, you mentioned something around data cleansing. What's your view on how we really promote them?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit earlier as well that it's around we need to change names. I know it sounds quite difficult, but you need to maybe have it. They're not called SDRs when they join the business. They are data apprentices. They're something else, because we need to make sure that people all understand what each role is. But then when they are a SDR in the traditional sense, we know that these people are driving big $1 million pipeline of creating $1 million opportunities in big strategic accounts, because they understand the mapping of the account. They're really that internal resource of the business, of the AE. But I think we just really need to make sure that we start to change what these roles and these definitions are now, or we're going to end up again having situations where there's a group of people who want to move into an AE role that are not ready, and their expectations were misaligned at the start.
I rather liked the AE apprentice that we came up with last week. That's my favourite. But Shabri, what about you? What are your thoughts?
I think on David's point, I worry that if we label the role like a data apprentice or data associate, I worry that it's not going to attract the talent that is needed for that SDR to be successful. Because I think those are two very different roles and very different skill sets. And so, sorry, Dave, I'm just trying to find a way to get some disagreement on this webinar.
Agreement, yeah. Data doesn't smack sales, does it? Might attract the wrong audience.
But I think in terms of the way we market SDRs, I think the whole predictable revenue model, whilst it was great when it came out, I think that's dying, or I think it's coming to a slow death. But I think the unit economics have got to make sense for SDR teams to work. It did very well when companies were receiving crazy funding rounds and were able to go and hire 20 SDRs and get every tool in the tech stack. I think that with companies that are very high volume and low ACV, I don't think we can justify the cost, because I don't think that can sustain the 50k OTE that I think is market rate right now, particularly in London. So I think companies have got to do the maths and see whether it works. I think it works well in mid-market space, and you can adjust the target and enablement accordingly. But I think also, like I said before, we've got to do more with less. So we can't have one SDR to 2 AEs. So I think you might see this, what Mark was talking about earlier, like getting them to support other roles and actually taking on a bit more, and then hopefully that can then justify the cost and demonstrate that ROI.
And you just made me a bit sad, because Predictable Revenue was the first ever sales book I read. So I feel a bit sad that Predictable Revenue is dead. But just to quickly summarize before we get onto our quick fire round, I'd love to just get one sentence from each of you about what we need to be doing now to future-proof ourselves. And Shabri, you're basically giving us a good summary just then. So what would be your one sentence of like, what do we need to do now for 12 months time, or even further ahead?
So for me, it's going to be the thing I'm most passionate about, which is skill development. So invest in proper enablement and coaching to help future-proof your talent bench.
Love that. Dave, can you beat that?
Yeah, everyone needs to learn how to use Clay or a data aggregator like that, because it's a little bit of data science, and I wasn't very good at data or science at school, so it's been a bit difficult. But what it will do is it starts to give you real high quality prompts where prospects are just about ready to have a conversation with you. You already know, and so you can be really personalized in that outreach. So go and learn how to use Clay. I
did not know about Clay until today. Dave, I hope you're going to be running a free workshop on this, please. So that's my request for you. So you can have a little moment to think about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Please, Mark.
Yeah, so I think ask yourself this question, which is, why are newsletters more popular than ever, even as conversion rates of outbound go down to the lowest levels ever? And it's because buyers still want to be educated, right? They still need to understand about their markets and how to solve their problems. So SDRs need to do more of that. They need to add value and educate, and not spam, right? And give more of a newsletter style experience. I think that's what future-proofs them.
Right. Thank you. So copy that newsletter. Right. Quick fire round. No more than one sentence here, please. What is the biggest misconception about AI and sales, Shabri?
That it's going to replace salespeople.
Mark.
That its rate of progress will continue at the same rate and be linear. I think people are underestimating the rate of progress it will make.
Dave?
I think it's a bit of a bubble.
Okay. What is the most important tool to be using considering? Dave, I feel like you've already said yours, but you might want to change it.
Most important tool, the phone.
Oh, thought you were going to go for Clay there.
Yeah.
I am going to say this. I would say RevDuck, while it's not a tool to be used by SDRs, it can be put into the organization and the value accrues to the SDRs.
Right. And good self-promotion there. And Shabri?
Conversation intelligence.
Now, outside of the three of you, and I will share your LinkedIn if you're okay for people to connect with you, who should we be following on LinkedIn about this topic? Dave?
Kevin Dorsey, KD, really good
Nice.
guy. Yeah, follow him.
Shabri?
Richard Smith. Tons of actionable insights for both managers and reps.
Great one. And Mark?
This guy called Scott Martinez. He's amazing. No BS, very value add, highly recommend.
And what sales framework is most relevant for now?
So I gave you the 5 Ps, but to add a different one, I think MedPick is massively underutilized in the SDR world. It can add a huge value there.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, same as Mark. I think that's, if you want to show real value as an SDR org, you need to use MedPick as a qualification framework.
Oh, and Anna's a big fan of this, and I now know what it stands for, as do my marketing community with a lesson in it.
Good.
Shabri, are you going to violently agree again?
I'm not. I'm gonna throw something else out there. I am going through a qualification framework called PACT, which is double T at the end. It's a modern day alternative to BANT. I wrote a LinkedIn post about it last week, which Nicola's just shared. But the reason I love it so much is it focuses on pain, authority, consequence, target profile, and timing. And I think the consequence thing is so great because I think it gets SDRs really asking themselves the so what question that I think BANT misses out on.
Nice. Okay, 2 more. Should SDRs report in marketing or sales? One of my favorites. Shabri?
Sales.
Mark?
I think it's going to move to marketing.
Oh, Dave, where are you going to go?
Neither. They'll have their own seat at the table.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I could go on a real tangent here, but I'm going to stop myself because what I would love to do before we go to some questions is, what's one piece of advice that you would give our wonderful audience to upskill?
Yeah,
Dave?
well, on my end, SDR leaders get a mentor who's at the C level or C-1 to really understand strategy and impact of your business unit in that strategy.
Shabri?
If you can train your reps on one area, it would be to get them curious and really effective questioning, because most buyers don't know that they have a problem. And if you can get your reps being curious and asking really good questions, it will set them apart from their competitors.
Nice. And Mark? Curiosity, questioning, mentor. What are you going to add?
I think they've got to be relentless and creative in adding value to prospects.
So adding that creativity as well. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes for questions before we wrap up. So John, I know you posted one earlier. Do you want to come off mute and just share what you wanted to talk about?
I can't remember what I asked.
You were asking if there was a role for a technologist in SDR team.
Ah, yes. So yeah, obviously as AI is coming in, lots more technology being used. Do you see it as being the SDRs having to take on board that and become a broader role themselves, or is there going to be room for a specialist to support the SDRs with the tech? Thanks, Nicola.
Who wants to take that one? Dave.
Yeah, I could take that. Yeah, I think there needs to be a standalone technologist in the group, because again, it's about giving time back to SDRs. And again, if we think about the profile of people who are SDRs, very young, straight out of school, most of the time, currently, they're not going to be able to focus, and they'll go on to the technology piece rather than do the thing that we want them to do, which is prospect and create revenue. So yeah, I think there will be a standalone person.
Interesting. Mark, how do you perceive this happening?
So I think, again, this goes back to the marketing have a bigger role to play in this area. I think marketing, and probably specifically demand gen, will actually own the types of campaigns and the tooling and technology around setting up the sales enablement for SDRs. That's in a more mature organization where they can afford that resource. In less mature or smaller organizations, I do think SDRs will have the ability to take control and build it themselves, which is an amazing career development opportunity.
And does this then kind of tie into the whole RevOps piece as well? Do they start to merge?
Potentially. I think RevOps in every organization I've seen, this is a whole different discussion, but I think RevOps are so resource constrained and so under the cosh that they have no time to build out all these other things. They are literally just trying to put their fingers in the basic plumbing of their organization to keep it going.
So true. I don't know any RevOps team that isn't completely over capacity. And what I find is, as soon as you hire the first one, suddenly you need a team of 5. So you had nothing, and then suddenly it's so required. Anna, I wondered if you were able to come off mute, because you made some really good comments about both the transition from SDRs to AEs and also about the hiring profile as well. And I'd love you to share some of that as well.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's been a great discussion. Thank you so much. I agree with what Shabri said, and I've gone through something very similar where some of my SDRs were promoted into a closing role. And unfortunately, they haven't really had the coaching and the enablement that they needed to make this a success. And it's soul destroying because they were the highest performing SDRs in the organization. So this is exactly why I said it's so important to have the buy-in of the sales organization as well, and those sales leaders, and for SDRs to start actually doing some part of an AE job, i.e. some of my SDRs, for example, started running calls with prospects, and they were doing the first 15, 20 minutes of the calls and doing presentations. And this was a great way for them to learn how to run these calls. And it really worked. And those SDRs were very successful as sellers as well. So for me, that coaching piece is super important.
Yeah, and I think you've got to set them up for success, haven't you? Because as you said, otherwise it's just soul destroying.
Yes.
What have you seen really work here?
Sorry, was that question
Yeah,
for me?
just building on that whole transition from SDR and AE, because you touched on it earlier. Any top tips for that transition so that you're really setting them up for success?
I think, as Anna said, I think set that expectation up front, but it shouldn't be guaranteed. And I think that's a common mistake that I've seen a lot of leaders make, which is they say in 24 months' time you'll progress to an AE role. It shouldn't be a guaranteed thing. It shouldn't be time based. It should be performance based. So think about what some of those performance metrics are, so it becomes like almost like like an objective thing that you've got to be, demonstrated A, B, and C over, 4 quarters. I think that can really help, and it can also set the right precedent that not everyone gets promoted.
Yeah, really important. And Mark, when you were turning around this SDR team before, how did you handle those promotions?
So again, in terms of the promotions, I think it's got to be performance based. I think those micro progressions are really, really important as well, which Dave, you've kind of alluded to. I think that's critical. And Anna, you mentioned that, so that it's so binary, right? You're an SDR doing this to suddenly you're an AE with a quota, and that's a really complex role to try and master very quickly if you've never done it before. So you've got to progress them through these micro transitions, I think is critical. You've got to provide them with the sales enablement. And I think the final thing is, certainly in the growth at all costs, SDRs could command a ridiculous amount of money and go to a junior AE role very, very quickly. So a lot of organizations felt threatened to move them too quickly. So I understand why they did that, but I guess it's ultimately the decision. If you want to lose that SDR and have them be an underqualified AE at another competitor, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, and bring people with a little bit of patience through your organization and cultivate the talent that way.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of that must promote, otherwise they're going to leave. Mark, I just want to say a big thank you for bringing everyone together here. I found this so valuable. And thank you also to everyone that joined us, because there's been some great chat and I've learned a lot from you guys as well. Mark, are we doing any more webinars? Because I find this so valuable, particularly as a marketeer.
We are indeed. So firstly, massive thank you, Nicola, for hosting, and Shabri and Dave, amazing insights and values that I knew you'd bring. We actually do have a webinar, same time next week, 1 to 2 p.m. on the Thursday, British Standard Time. And that's all about how to connect with buyers in 2024. So very quick snippet. Insight Research Partners Insight Revenue Partners did a survey of go-to-market teams, and they found that only 6% of go-to-market teams believe that their messages communicate unique insights on how they solve customers' problems. So a really big problem when you're trying to win new business. So we're going to talk all about that. How do you convey value? How do you connect with buyers in a very busy and competitive market? Nicola, wonderfully, you'll be hosting again next week. And we've got an amazing CMO in Florence Broderick, who's currently CMB7, and then Zachary Grover, who's the CEO and founder of Insight Revenue, coming to talk more about the insights of the report. And we're going to talk not just about problems, but about solutions.
6%. That's going to stick with me all day. John, did you have a quick last question? Okay, right. Well, that leads me to say thank you so much, Mark, Shabri, and Dave. That was super valuable. As I said, I've posted the LinkedIn in the chats. We'll also follow up with an email with that as well. And they're really happy if you've got more questions. You can bombard them on LinkedIn as well. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon. And hope you get to enjoy some of the sunshine this evening as well. Hope to see you next week.
Bye.
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 Bye.